Hey everybody, welcome back into our virtual happy hour. It's Thursday, Thirsty Thursday. We're almost at the end of the week, so get excited. We got another great guest on the show today. I'm going to bring in Jeff Alworth, who is the founder of Beervana beer blog. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, we were talking early on about your hat, Jeff. Now you are a Boston Red Sox fan. I am as well. So we're covering the coast here. You're on the Pacific Northwest. I'm on the East Coast. So it's going to be a great time talking all things beer and maybe a little Red Sox in there. We don't know. We may get there. We're not sure. So before we get started, though, the most important part of any virtual happy hour is the beer we are drinking. So, Jeff, you're my guest today. Let's start out with you. What are you drinking tonight on this happy hour?
I got a Dwinell Echo Chamber here, and it is perhaps a beer that a lot of people, or a brewery that a lot of people don't know. Small brewery in Goldendale, Washington, which is in South Central Washington. Actually, not the kind of place you'd expect to find a brewery that makes kind of high quality rustic ales and some wild ales and cool saisons and stuff like that. It's it's an old kind of industrial logging town that's fallen on hard times. So interesting place to start a brewery. But they're doing great work, and it is sort of equidistant between Portland and Seattle. So they do have that going for them. So that's what I got here.
Awesome. Well, I've got here, this is from New York. This is called Premier, which is from Interbro. It is their India Pale Ale. I think it's a double dry hop. This is a new brewery out of Brooklyn, New York. And they were just popping up when I used to live there in New York. So this is pretty cool. So if you're out there right now, crack open your beverage and pour it into your glass. Or if you don't have a glass, right out of the can. I'm using this fancy Untapped Take-You glass I just got in the mail here. So pour it into your glass there. And also remember to check in on Untapped and tag your venue as Untapped at Home. It's a great way to kind of encourage people to be safe out there and let them know that you're being safe and social distancing with us and drinking a beer. So raise my glass to you guys. Thank you so much for watching. And Jeff, thanks for joining and enjoy your beverage.
Thank you. Cheers.
Delicious. Like a fresh IPA on a Thursday evening. So, Jeff, let's get right into it. People don't know about Beervana blog. Tell us a little bit about the story of how that started and a little bit about your history in the beer world.
Sure. I've written about beer for a long time, going back actually into the late 90s when I was writing a column for the local alt weekly here in town called Willamette Week. And then I got more into political writing and was doing that for about a decade, and it was feeling a little bit toxic. So I started a beer blog just as a way of kind of having something pleasant to write about, and that was way back in 2006. And it has just been my main spot for writing about beer since. And it's kind of evolved and become more professional as I have become a more professional writer over the time. Yeah.
So has your background always been in writing, or is it more the beer came first or the writing came first when coming together and putting this together?
They were two passions that were parallel passions, which I managed to bring together at a certain point. That column that I mentioned was written by a really wonderful writer named William Abernathy, who went to San Francisco to do tech writing, I think make money. And he left, and they had an open call for what was called the MASH column, and I managed to land that. So that was sort of when I pulled them together. And I wasn't able to write professionally for a decade and a half after that, but it was fun. It was, and I first got my exposure to the kind of deeper world of the beer industry. That was really valuable.
It's very different than maybe people think about when it comes to the beer world industry there. But, obviously you're based out in Portland. One of the biggest areas for breweries, I believe, I'm not sure, you'd probably be the right one to answer this question. Is it still the largest brewery per square miles per area in the country, or is that San Diego, or has it changed? Because the last time I was in Portland, I'll tell the story everybody wants to hear. I wasn't able to attend all the breweries. There's just too many per square mile there. How has it been growing up in that area and looking at all the brewery growth? And has it become more, oversaturated, or do you still feel like you're getting new ones every day and they're all making their own mark?
Yeah, we've actually seen quite a bit of change. So I don't know the answer about breweries, counting breweries. I actually had a post a while back where I wrote about the Schrodinger's brewery and how you count breweries. You count breweries. Like if you've got 2 breweries on one facility, how do you count that? How do you count gypsy brewers? How do you count, multiple breweries? We have a chain here called the McMinimans, and they have a ton of pubs, but they also have like 6 or 8 breweries. So is that one brewery? Is it 6 or 8? Yeah. It's impossible.
A great discussion over a beer, that's for sure.
Yeah. So I don't think we're the most breweried anymore. I think that reputation comes because very early on, we were the most breweried. We started calling our hometown Beervana back in the early 90s because it was such a beery place. So, we've just had kind of an entrenched beer culture here for a lot longer than most cities. And I think now other cities have caught up. We've got 8,000 breweries. The explosion, I think, has probably meant that other cities have at least as many as we do. It's kind of hard to tell. I do know that London, England has more than we do, for sure.
Got it.
London has over 100 and growing all the time. So, yeah. But in terms of breweries, we do. The other thing that's interesting about Portland is we do have, I think, probably the most mature culture here in the country. And so in 2019, we saw, late 2018, early 2019, we saw the closure of some kind of classic old stalwart breweries, and that kind of unfolded over 2019. So we're seeing this, this passing of the guard as newer breweries come along, and some of the old legacy breweries just can't really compete. It's a really tough market. So, your game has got to be strong.
That's true. We have a comment here from Max as well. And Max says, one thing I've learned about Portland is that people love their beer there. And I have to agree. There are so many that are in that area and growing every single day, like you mentioned. But I think the maturity is an interesting part that you brought up there. I think that there's a sense of, well, we have 1,000 breweries, but like maybe 2 or 3 are actually mature and good. And the rest are kind of not really focused on. And I think that's the difference in Portland, in my experience, is that every brewery you go to, for the most part, has their own kind of theme, their own kind of way of working, and they all have a maturity of it that makes you really feel like you get a good quality beer almost everywhere you go.
Yeah, I do think that's probably accurate. I think our median brewery is probably better than the median brewery in a lot of places because, part of this is an economic thing where you have a market and people, the consumers begin to demand more, and so the breweries have to make better beer. But also, we have Great Western Malting is right across the river in Vancouver, Washington, about 5 miles from my house. That's been there forever. We have the hop fields. We have the Oregon State is where the hops, like Cascade and Willamette hops, were developed. There's a brewing school there. So we have all these incredible resources. So they also help create a level of quality. All these things kind of there's a feedback loop. And now we have a ton of really good brewers, many who are trained that have degrees, microbiological degrees, brewing degrees, European brewing degrees. So all of that stuff really helps bring the level of quality up. So we don't, that the classic, you walk in and it's a brew pub and half the beers are kind of terrible and some of them are that's not so much a thing anymore here.
Yeah. In case you're joining us late, we're talking to Jeff, who is the founder and editor of Brewvana, a Pacific Northwestern beer blog. We talk about all types of stuff on there. If you want to ask Jeff a question, we want to get him on the hot seat, ask some really great questions, make him sweat a little bit over there. Make sure you use your chat platform, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, and we'll hopefully get some questions on the board here. Let's ask this question here from Aquavert, and he says, or she says, if you were to tour Portland solely on breweries, which ones should I go if I liked a particular maker style? I believe that's what it says. Top 5, or how many can you recommend? That's putting you on the spot of like your favorite breweries or your favorite kids. But if you're someone that's never visited Portland before, where would be your go-tos for checking out the scene?
Yeah. One cool thing that's happened here too is that we've had, because there are so many breweries have begun to specialize. So we have breweries that kind of are interested in farmhouse ales, or we now have, weirdly, a number of breweries that are interested in lagers and German style beers, in addition, of course, to breweries that do IPAs, which are still a durable beer style here. So I usually try to recommend to people, if they're coming to Portland, for a lot of times I ask what kind of beer you're interested in, because if they say, I like lagers, then I'm not going to send them to Breakside, for example, which is our premier IPA house. But just as sort of an overview, I'd say maybe Breakside's a really good place to go. They have 3 breweries, and if you go to the Slabtown location, it was purpose built to make hoppy IPAs, hoppy beers. Most of the beer they make is some version of an IPA or a pale ale. So they do a lot of different kinds of experimentation with hops. It's a fun location, and the beer there is experimental and interesting in that vein of hops, and so that's good. I would say they're one of the cool new upstart breweries that focuses on lagers is called Wayfinder. And that's definitely a must go to. It's close to downtown, so it's pretty centrally located, so it's Breakside. A third place I would send folks is Upright. I think Upright, it's overlooked a lot. They only make about 1,000 barrels. But the brewer there, Alex Ganoom, is one of the most talented brewers on the planet, and I can say that with some confidence because I visited a lot of the breweries on the planet. And he can take any beer style and make it sing. And he has mostly focused on traditional European styles. Particularly, he got started doing saisons and that kind of stuff. But I think his true genius is his ability to do barrel age stuff and blend. He doesn't have a huge brewery, but he has a real skill with making these complex flavors that are super approachable and super tasty. They're not wild ales, like those things that make people kind of wince, like, is this going to be a painful experience? They're those kind of beers that you could hand to anyone and challenge them not to like them. They're just super tasty. I mean, a lot of people, if they want the classic last 5 years model, really like Great Notion. They do juicy IPAs, hazy IPAs. They were the first house in town to really go full on in hazy IPAs. And they do pastry beers as well. They do them very well, and they're very pastry, and people will sort themselves whether they like that or not. If you like them, they're really well done, and I think they're actually kind of a challenging style to make. So kudos to them. I would throw Ruse Brewery in there. It's one of the early more recent breweries, and probably a brewery not a lot of people have heard of. And they're one of those breweries that kind of does it all. They do IPAs, they do hazies. They're known for their hazies, but actually their flagship is a regular West Coast IPA. But I think the brewers like lagers, because I love lagers, and when I go in there, there's all lagers. So they're really solid young guys doing some great work. Their brewery is kind of a funky, it's in a weird location. It's kind of a funky brewery, and it's fun too. So there's 5. Oh, I got to throw in Little Beast too. Let me give a shout out to Little Beast, which also does wild ales, barrel aged stuff, also really good. And they have, if you happen to come on a summer day when you're allowed to go to a brewery, they have a beautiful outdoor seating place, which is a fantastic place to have a beer. So there's a few. I could talk about Portland breweries all day long. I'm already feeling that I've left a few out that are super that I'm a fan of. So.
Well, we appreciate the question, Aquavert. Thanks for watching. You've been on for a little while, so appreciate it. Here's a great another question from Jeffrey Bennett. It's Jeff, love the podcast, one of the best ones out there, especially combining an economic aspect of the art and style of beer. How did you and Patrick come together? Maybe talk a little bit about where the podcast is for those that don't know exactly what it is.
It's the Beervana podcast, and I have to say, my experience here with you today is a lesson in professionalism compared to our garage setup. This is very impressive compared to what we do. But Patrick is a professor of economics at Oregon State University. And we met on the first day of school as undergraduates. We didn't become friends for probably close friends for maybe another year and a half, but we met on the first day of college and then became fast friends. We actually spent Patrick bounced around and did grad school in a number of places, but one of the places he was at grad school was Wisconsin when I was there in grad school. And so we have kind of been good friends as he's bounced around the country and I've bounced around the country and the world. We've lived all over the place. And now he's back in Portland, which is fantastic. So we hang out, and he actually pitched the idea. He's a bit of a Luddite, and I don't know, this was like 4 or 5 years ago, and he said, hey, do you know about these things called podcasts? Yeah, Patrick,
they're going to explode, I guarantee you.
That's right. He was giving me a hot tip. He said, we should have a podcast. So he believes he's the second banana in that whole thing, but as Jeffrey suggests, I think most people, the kind of content that I can offer, which is like I can tell you what the best brewery in Portland is a lot of people can talk about that. Patrick can actually offer economic analysis that the layman doesn't have. So I think I think what he offers is really quite interesting and probably more the most valued part of our podcast.
Awesome. Well, Jeffrey, thank you so much for the question. If you join us today, we're talking to Jeff, who is the founder and editor of Beervana beer blog out in Pacific Northwestern beers primarily. So if you have a question for Jeff, let's put him on the hot seat. Let's answer those questions there. So we got another one here from JC, I believe is the pronunciation. Can you give any advice to prospective beer writers about how to get started, how to pitch book projects? This is a good question because one thing we haven't discussed right now is that you are an author for many books. So maybe give a little background on that while answering the question as well.
Sure. Yeah. That's when I decided to become, do this for a living. My big plan was that I would be a book writer, and I pitched a book that would eventually turn into the Beer Bible, which is kind of the book that I think most people know me for, through a circuitous route, which is not necessary to get into. But I would say just begin writing. It used to be that I would suggest that you try to write for magazines and learn how to do journalism. That's more and more difficult since there are fewer and fewer magazines. Yeah. So, there are opportunities. I have a blog, which I've had forever. Blogs are a little bit kind of outdated, but you can write for places like Good Beer Hunting. I think it's really valuable to get your to learn the craft of writing and the journalistic aspects, learning how to talk to breweries and get information. But when you're ready to pitch a book, Jace, you should probably just ping me and I can tell you it's a really long process and it's kind of painful. And I typically tell people not to do it. It's, the amount of money that you make, your hourly wage is terrible. And the whole idea is that you will go through this process, this painful, long process where you don't make any money, and the book will sell well, and then you'll get it on the back end. And that doesn't happen all that often. So, book writing. The other side is if you want to write a book, you have an idea for a book. I think there is some virtue in just writing a book for its own sake. So there are ways to do that. I just explored that in my most recent blog post about self-publishing, which is now no longer considered an embarrassing thing. And especially if you're focused on some topic that's too narrow for a traditional publisher, but will be valuable to like an audience who wants to learn more about beer. A lot of times you can bring something to the table that is very valuable. And if you're looking to build a career, that can help you become a recognized expert in that. So an example is there's this wonderful writer, I'm sure many people watching now know Lars Garshol, who does the Scandinavian farmhouse stuff. And my guess is the book that he's written, which I encourage everybody to get, he only has one book, so just look up Lars Garshol and you'll find it. It's one of the most interesting books about beer I've ever read. I don't think it will sell a huge amount of, he's not going to get rich off that book, but he has literally changed the way we think about beer through his work. Like all the Kveikiests that's all Lars's job. He discovered those things, took them to labs. That's all his jam. So, think about, if you can think about beer in a new way that's not being covered. That's a real contribution, and people will be interested in that. So that's my recommendation.
There you go. Let's go to one more question here as we go into our segments here. This one's from Mary Robinson, and she asked, outside of Portland, we talk a lot about Portland here. What are our favorite breweries in Hood River, Bend, and Astoria, Baker City? Any options there?
Oh, my God. Well, if you come to Portland, I strongly recommend you take a drive down the gorge 1 hour, which is actually in the direction of these guys. So you head east down the Columbia River Gorge to Hood River, and in Hood River you'll find Freem Family Breweries, Double Mountain, a new brewery called Ferment, and if you loop back around, you can head right towards Mount Hood, and in the shadow of Mount Hood is a little place called Solera Brewing, and you can make a day of it. Those are some of the best breweries we have in the city, in the state, and I think many people would say that Freem is the best brewery in the state. The drive is gorgeous, and you get to encounter some wonderful beer. There's a bit of a rivalry, I think, a soft rivalry maybe between Bend and Portland. Bend certainly has more breweries, given its size, than any city in America. It's got fewer than 100 people, and it's got 30 breweries or something.
Wow.
So did I say 100 people? 100,000? It's just got crazy amounts of breweries, and some of them, like Deschutes, are quite large. There's a number of quite large breweries there. They probably have a half dozen that make over 20,000 barrels. Bend is amazing. I think Deschutes continues to be the best-selling beer in Oregon, which says something because we know good beer. I think people have kind of overlooked Deschutes in recent years, but people drink so much of it because it's so good, and it's nice to go to the mothership. There are other cool breweries there, like Crux. Larry Sidor started brewing for Olympia Brewing back in the 1970s, and he finally was able to found his brewery after doing a stint at Deschutes. That's Crux. Definitely a cool brewery worth a stop, and there are many there. Astoria's got some great breweries. Baker City's got Barley Browns. Sorry, brain fart.
No worries.
And the Central Willamette Valley, where Eugene and Corvallis are, also have some fantastic breweries. So we have great breweries everywhere.
We just, another person just in the comments said about Corvallis, that was obviously mentioned as well. I have cousins that live in Eugene, actually, to believe it or not. So I know that area is growing significantly across the board. One of the things we talk about a lot with every person we talk to about is obviously COVID and its effects on the industry. We talked a little bit about COVID before we started the show here, but in terms of what you're seeing from trends from breweries, I always like to ask this question. Every state's different, but in Oregon, what are they doing from a helping hand, for lack of a better word, to breweries? Are there less restrictions on delivery, or what are people doing to make ends meet when it comes to breweries in those areas?
Yeah, just a really quick overview. Oregon has been hit quite lightly with COVID. We are experiencing a little bit of a return, but our overall numbers and our numbers per capita are way low. The state opened up before this. The county, Multnomah County, which is where Portland is, it opened up maybe almost a month. It took Multnomah County a long time to open up. But the state is kind of, in that halfway, it's kind of open now. Oregon is amazing in the summer. We don't really get any rain. And so outdoor seating, which is the safest way to go, is right. This is our time. So
yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of breweries right now that that you can visit and sit outside, which is great. But yeah, the way breweries survived COVID has, like everybody, they had to scramble and try to figure out what to do. There was no game plan for this.
Right.
But I can speak a little bit more to Portland than the rest of the state. I've been covering this on my blog, and Portland breweries figured out pretty early on that it was legal and that they could do home delivery. Oregon has very liberal beer laws. So
Hmm.
already we were in a pretty good position as far as that went. But many of the breweries that were the most celebrated and beloved really focused on draft beer and had to figure out what to do. So home delivery became a pretty big deal, and many of these breweries have been surviving off home delivery. We saw a huge uptick in home delivery, and I don't know that it kept volumes up for those breweries that had to depend on it to, pre-COVID levels, but it allowed them to stay in business, and that's important. A brewery I mentioned before, Breakside, they're a 20,000 barrel brewery, and they were selling 70% of their beer on draft. So there, as one example, they were immediately kind of screwed. So they went out and bought a canning line, and wanted, they did have regular distribution to grocery stores and so on. So they just, they had to just shift entirely to try to make up that lost volume. So I think, it's like many other places. We thought it was going to be a lot worse than it has. Breweries really haven't been closing like I would have expected. If you'd told me that we'd be knocking on the door of August and this thing would still be raging, I would have said, oh my God, half of our breweries are going to be gone. But
right.
I don't think we've lost a single brewery to COVID. A couple of breweries have closed down for unrelated reasons, but yeah, the breweries are able to mostly get PPP loans and other federal aid, and are starting to get a little bit back on their feet. And who can say, if this thing continues until through the fall and everything closes back down, which it probably will. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a weird industry for sure. I know that you've talked about this in your blog a lot. We've talked over Twitter about it. I think fundamentally the concept of a person drinking a beer has changed and will change because of COVID. We used to just not even think twice about being in a crowded bar and being next to someone so close. But I think those days are long gone from that perspective. So, it's going to be interesting when and if these things turn around, hopefully when, how people will react in these bar settings, and where will there be an immediate turnaround if they see more than X amount of people in the locations. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that unfolds. But it's great to hear that, obviously the breweries haven't closed down. It's a big thing for even the Brewers Association have been talking about how this has been a really hardship for a lot of breweries. But the home delivery obviously is a really important part. I know in Connecticut, I've said this a couple times on our show, is that we just opened up home delivery in the States. Anyone can deliver directly to the consumer. That's got to help some people, at least, kind of that don't have the ability from a large distributor or smaller ones, or even grocery stores that are not able to carry on there from that perspective. So that's obviously a very, very positive thing there.
Yeah, it has been, and it's a different business model. I've talked to some of the breweries who have been doing this, and they say, I used to be a brewer and now I'm a beer delivery guy.
Yeah.
But there is a cool thing. One, you got to look for your silver linings where you can find them, and one is that these breweries that are doing home delivery are starting to develop a more personal relationship to their customers. And,
yes.
I think in Portland, it was definitely the case that many people had the immediate reaction, we got to save these breweries. I got to start ordering beer from my favorite brewery. They're going to go away. So it has been personal, and there has been a nice outpouring of support from beer drinkers. So that's been very positive.
Well, we've got a celebrity in the chat right now. I'm going to put him up on the screen. John Hall, which we've had on our show numerous times today. He says, Jeff's a national treasure. His words and thoughts on beer have made us all better beer drinkers. I don't agree with this last statement here, being a Red Sox fan myself, but I just wish he would support a better baseball team. John, we'll have to take it out virtually on this one. The Red Sox, even though they're 1-4 start this year. I don't even know what team you follow, John. You're in Jersey. What is it, the Mets? Because he just kicked our butts over the past year. So, but thank you, John, for writing in. Definitely agreeing with those statements, except for the last one. So,
right. Me too. John's a friend of mine. John, your $100 check is in the mail. Thanks.
Yeah. Very cool. Let's go to a couple more questions here. Let's see. What can we find? Some good questions. This one's from Bob Husson, and he says, we've seen a number of West Coast breweries move to the Asheville, North Carolina area, but there's an Asheville brewery that has expanded to Denver and Portland, Thirsty Monk. What do you think of that one?
Well, yeah, Thirsty Monk just closed everything outside of Asheville, so that was an issue. Yeah, the truth is, I never made it to Thirsty Monk. I thought I had more time, and coronavirus came, and then they closed. So, yeah, I wish I could offer you more on that. I don't have anything there. That is one of the challenges as a beer writer. I need to cover all these breweries, and there are probably, I don't know, 60 to 80, something like that in Portland, and that's excluding all the other ones in Oregon. And you can do the math. Like, it's hard to get to all those breweries, even if you're going out a lot, which I don't do. So it's challenging, and I confess I never made it to Thirsty Monk.
Well, we'll get you next time. When this thing all lifts, we'll have you back on. Bob, you'll pay attention. You'll watch it and we'll answer that question right away once we get the insider information. So
yeah,
we'll wait till next time.
I've always wanted to go to Asheville, so maybe I can do it that way. That might be the better.
There you go. I mean, that's an interesting point. Is that beer tourism, I think, is something that's huge. And Asheville is one of those cities that people know it for the beer. I would say about 5 or 6 years ago, Portland was the same thing. Do you believe still Portland is viewed as a beer tourism spot? Oh,
absolutely. It's huge. Up until, I don't know how many years ago, I'm really bad about time, but we knew we had great beer, but we drank all our beer. So it actually never really left Oregon, except, Rogue had a national platform, but they were the only brewery. So people would say, really, we don't know anything about Oregon beer. That shifted at some point not so long ago. And the last few years, I just welcome a huge number of people who are coming from all over the world, really, who friends and people I know, connections I have to other breweries, who are making pilgrimages just to come to Portland, Oregon, for the beer, entirely for the beer. There's a blogger in Ireland, the Beer Nut, who does beer reviews from Ireland, and he and his wife did their 20th wedding anniversary in America a couple of years back, and he told her, and they went to Washington and New York, and he said, we got to go to Portland, and so he forced her to fly all the way across the country to come to Portland just so they could taste the beer. Those kinds of stories are actually not uncommon anymore.
Yeah,
people now recognize that we have interesting stuff going on here, and they want to check it out.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know I learned a lot about Portland breweries. It makes me really want to travel out there again, but unfortunately we have this situation that we keep calling COVID-19 that's keeping me from the great breweries of Portland, Oregon, and the area there. But want to give you an opportunity to kind of give any last minute shout outs so people can find you on social media or websites, your blog, or things of that nature before we sign off.
Yep. I'm at Beervana on Twitter. My blog is called the Beervana blog, and my podcast is the Beervana podcast. You might sense a theme there. If you Google my name, if you're dying for my books, which you should be, you can Google my name, and Amazon has them all usually on big discount. So check them out.
We all have plenty of time to sit inside and read books. So if you're going to do that, might as well get one from Jeff there. But thank you so much, Jeff. A pleasure to have you on, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for watching our virtual happy hour on this Thursday. I hope you had a great time, and I did as well. Want to give you a little update of what's happening on our next episodes next week as we turn over to the August month. We're ending July. So on August 4th, which will be a Tuesday, we're going to have my friend Matt Galligan, who is an serial entrepreneur in the tech world and a big beer lover, and actually one of the first Untapped advisors. So we're going to talk a little about Midwest beers. He's from the Chicago area, Illinois area, and we're going to talk about the founding of Untapped and all the great things there. And then on that Thursday, we're going to talk to Jessica Infante, who is a Brewbound reporter. She has been a friend of mine. We've been communicating on Twitter a lot, and she writes a lot of great stories on brewbound.com about all the things that are happening in the beer world. So plenty of stuff to talk about with her. And finally, if you have any feedback for us, that you want to give any feedback on people you want to see on the show, or feedback about me, hey, I'm getting my pores better. If you watch the show, the pores are really good. So no more emails about that. You can email us at media@untapped.com. And listen to our podcast, which is the same audio version of these conversations, anywhere you listen to your podcast there. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks for watching, and cheers.